Hello and welcome to our evening event, Support for Disabled Students in Higher Education. Thank you for joining us today. We've got the next hour with you. So a bit about HEP. So I'm Kelly Self and I'm the project coordinator for HEP, and we support students out in schools in South Yorkshire, and we also work with students who are disabled but care experienced and young carers as well. We are a jointly funded programme with the University of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam, who are with us today, and we've also got a colleague from Barnsley. And as I said, we work with schools across South Yorkshire, and our aim is to encourage more young people, children and adults to explore higher education as an option. So a bit about the session today. We're going to be talking about accessibility, so understanding that higher education is accessible for everyone, for disabled students, the terminology sort of to clarify the difference there between HE as it differs from schools and college, the support that you can get in higher education as well, and how to set this up. Then we'll do a brief bit about the DSA, so introduce Disabled Students Allowance. We do also have a session on this in February time that is specifically just for that, and then provide guidance on supporting disabled students as they consider higher education options. So that's the session content for us today and what we're going to be delivering.
Hello everyone. My name's Jackie Reaney. I'm the Higher Education Disability Advisor at Barnsley College of HE University Centre. It gets longer every time I say it. Is it long? My badge doesn't fit it anymore. But it's fitting to mention the myths around our labels when we begin to look at the Disabled Students Allowance and the terminology that greets and meets your learners as they move into higher education. So once a student gets onto a level 4 course or a university course, we're not talking about additional learning needs anymore. We're not talking about additional support anymore, SEN or special needs. It's always under the flag of disabled students. And I know that people get a bit worried about the use of the phrase disability, and you might think, well, that wouldn't cover me because I've got chronic fatigue, or that wouldn't cover me because I've got dyslexia. But actually, when we talk about disabled students, within an educational context in universities, it encompasses anyone who has a diagnosis of something that will impact upon how they study, that will impact upon their attention, their concentration, their comfort in lectures, their transfer around campus. So it's anything that impacts upon the learner's studies. So we use that phrase, we continue to use that phrase deliberately, disabled students, because back in the day, when Disability Discrimination Act came out in the 90s, it gave our work a context which was legal and required and legislative. So when that Disability Discrimination Act was absorbed by the Equality Act in 2010, we still cling to the disabled students tag because it serves as a reminder to all of us and yourselves and college staff and at school, the staff at schools. It reminds everyone that we're working within a legitimate legislative framework and that we've got the weight of the law behind us. So that's important to us. I have known students spend 3 years looking for additional learning support, only to say that we don't have one at Cambridge, but it's there. It will be called Disabled Student Services or Disabled Student Support. So the SENDCo that you know yourselves, the work you do is absorbed into the service that we offer, and we're called disability advisors or disability coordinators, and we do the similar work within each university. I'm a one on my own because we're a small institution, but for most universities there's a team of 4, 5, 6 disability coordinators or disability advisors, and we all do exactly the same we all provide the exact same role. And that's deliberately, so that when a student moves from one university to another for whatever reason, then their process, the DSA process and the system they're in can just be continued. So the SEN team that you're aware of and learning support as you know it becomes disability, and it might sit within a wellbeing service or an inclusion team, but look for the word disability. The next one, learner does not need a diagnosis to receive access arrangements. This is where things have changed a little bit. In the right-handed column, a higher education, when we're looking at getting DSA funded support in place and actioning solid adjustments around a student's condition or disability or dyslexia or autism, we need to have a full diagnostic report, because student finance rule the roost, they govern the rules around it, they govern the funding around it, and they require evidence, medical evidence of every condition that we're working to. So a PIP report would be no good. It's got to be NHS labelled medical letter, medical evidence, or a GP note, and we can explain that as we go through with each learner applicant. But that's, you know, that's not something we're deliberately putting in the way as a barrier. It's their requirements, the SFE requirements, in order to deliver what we need them to deliver. So whereas at the moment you might be at school or at college, your students would not need to have a full diagnosis, but maybe just a discussion about access arrangements, that does change when we move into a university context. So the EHCP, it's not that it disappears, it's that we absorb it into what we have as the disabled students allowance. So we translate the EHCP into something that we can use in order to provide each applicant with a package of support to address all their needs. And that partly is a budget from Student Finance England, but also is partly going to be something that the course we put together with the course to provide a bespoke, tailored support for every student. So it's not that we disregard your EHCP work, it's that we absorb it and continue it. Next slide, please. So we are an important resource. I mean, I'm sure you'll agree we are. I think we are. So it's really important that every applicant makes contact with the disability service, because it's not just for preparation for transition. We continue the work once the student is here, once the student arrives at college, we're that point of contact to make sure their study delivery and their reasonable adjustments match what the condition would require them to match. So we're an important resource from here on in. And here on in, I'm even talking about our students for next year, because at the minute I'm working towards meeting up with students who'll be coming in September 26. So the role of us is to make equal access. That doesn't just mean in terms of physical access and footfall around the university. It's about making sure that our courses are taught in a way that matches the way that the student will learn. So we have to take account of energies and concentration, dyslexia issues, or autism, the busyness around campus, the things that might interfere with how the student engages well with the course. And in that way, we've got to make sure that we find tools to deal with making it a more comfortable experience, and then that provides the equal access. We talk about personalised support. The word support is again a strange word. We still use it, but if I ask a student, an applicant, a new student applying for next year, what support do you think you'll need? Sometimes they say, I don't think I'll need anything, just extra time and access to a laptop. Now that is support. When you get to university, any tools you need, any strategies that your applicants will need are what we would think of as support. So those are the things we need to be starting to prepare for. I think I prefer the word strategies. If we start to look at student strategies, then we're looking at how you're going to deal, how your student learners are going to deal with the course, and how best to make sure it matches how they study. And then confidentiality, because we're working with students over the age of 18, they're adults. We need to make sure it's a confidential service, and we follow therefore a very secure information sharing process. Now that means that we can only tell tutors what the student is happy for us to share with them. It means that we can't look back at the history the student has had at school. And you know, I've always been dyslexic. I've always had 25% extra time. You'll know that from my school. When your student applicants begin a university course, they start with a clean sheet. So we only get to know those things the student wants us to know, and they have to disclose to us those things that they feel will make a difference, that those things where they feel their studies will be compromised. So we have to try and get people's trust from here on in, really, because our applicants are only going to share with us what they feel comfortable with sharing. But it's really important that we keep that level of confidentiality. So early contact at the bottom. By early, I don't mean at the start of term. The process for applying for DSA can be 2 to 3 months. So if I just get to meet a student, as today, I met with a student who had made no contact with us until this term, that student will not be in receipt of their DSA before Christmas. And that isn't to do with our waiting times, it's to do with Student Finance England processes. They're 2 to 3 months. So therefore, early contact actually means as soon as the paperwork comes out, and that's the beginning of March. So for March next year, your applicants, your students can begin to apply for the disabled students allowance in whichever the university they're going to attend. So we can start that contact from the end of February, beginning of March, and that will keep the student on track right through the summer in preparation. Thank you. Next slide, please, Kelly. So the disability advisor, us, we're that dedicated point of contact. Yes, it's important that the learners meet with the tutors and the course teams and engage with other areas of the university, but we might be the ones who drive the contact with those other areas. So as long as your student applicant makes contact with the disability team, they will be in the system, and we will drive that forward. We provide ongoing advice and guidance at whatever point of the course they're at. So my student who came to see me this morning, he's in his final year and had not sort of stepped forward and sought support until now. So regardless of when the student contacts us, our support begins then. The earlier, the better, but we don't have a cut-off point. We work right through with you, with your students. Review of previous support. We will talk to the learner about what they've had at college or at school, but we build on that in what we put together for the university experience. We don't want to discount anything the students had previously, but we want to build on it and make sure that it matches now the study options as a student moves through their academic year 1, year 2, year 3. We identify appropriate support within the universities. We call that our RAP sheet, so reasonable adjustment plan. So we sit down with the student and we work out, what do you think you need in the class situation? What do you think you might need in terms of support around getting around the university? So, you know, some students might need a lift pass to make sure they get access to the lift at busy times. Some students might need a level of study skills support. Some students might need access with getting to another campus. Some students might need to pop out of class if they feel overwhelmed. So we work out, based on what the student tells us has been effective previously, how we can translate that into a bespoke level of support to cover them throughout the university experience. And the guide through the DSA process, yes, the DSA, the Disabled Students Allowance, is perhaps the most important process they need to encounter, and we should start that help as soon as the paperwork becomes available in February, March next year. And we can be there as a point at any time to say, this should have happened by now. Have you not had this? Because sometimes students don't recognise what the email has meant that they've been sent from student finance, and we just might need to be available to interpret that. Next slide, please. So I'm finishing this bit with the start of it, because the start of it is the UCAS form. In the academic year, your learners will be asked to complete a UCAS form, which involves ticking a disability box. And there are all kinds of myths around, well, who's going to see this? Who's going to make a judgment on me about it? And actually, that front sheet where the disability is ticked and disclosed, that's the bit the disability service team gets at the new host university. And that's the bit that we can start to use from now. I'm getting next year's now to make provision for my student intake for next year. So the earlier the better. The ticking the box doesn't mean that tutors get information on your disability. At this stage, it is just about alerting the disability team to the fact that here's a student coming in who might need some strategies and support arrangements. So to end with the important thing, disclosure to the university team. We want you to feel that you trust what we do enough to be able to work around what you know you need and what you know that you've already have. And the challenges you know that your health issue or mental health issue or disability places upon you during your studies. So the important thing is disclosure, but feel that you can trust us with doing that so that we can take you through the various stages and the processes for delivering that support. I hope that those sections have been able to sort of demyth some of the language around disability once you get onto a university. Thank you.
Hi everybody, so I'm Alison Jones and I'm the Disability Transition Officer, and I'm based in the Disability and Dyslexia Support Service at Sheffield University. Okay, so this just gives a little bit more context in terms of which students are eligible to access a university's disability service. So Jackie's already referred to some of this already, but essentially we use the Equality Act definition of disability. So students who have a long-term impairment or condition that significantly impacts on their studies are likely to be able to access the disability service. So the term disability is much broader than a lot of students might first realise. So that includes students who have a specific learning difficulty, learning difference, students with a long-term mental health condition, students with long-standing illness or health condition, autistic students, students who have ADHD, anybody with a physical impairment or mobility difficulty, students with sensory impairments, and anybody with a speech, language or communication difficulty. That does obviously include students with multiple diagnoses, and that list is not exhaustive. So if you are in contact with a potential university student who isn't sure if they're going to be eligible for support through a disability service, it's definitely worth getting in contact with us to have a chat about that. And that includes students who haven't accessed support in previous education, as well as those students who maybe, you know, think they should have, but for whatever reason haven't had that in place. Okay, so in terms of types of support, so what do we mean by support? So it's about, like Jackie said, it's about providing the necessary study strategies. So it's about thinking about what are the strategies that might help a student overcome any potential barriers. So that's barriers, it might be barriers within independent study, it might be barriers in terms of sitting exams, writing assignments, note taking. So what barriers might that student experience on their course, in their independent learning, and what can we do to support them to reach their full potential. In terms of what the support will look like, it does very much depend on a student's specific needs. That's why it's really important that applicants have that contact with the disability service in advance, because we need to work out with the student what their support is going to look like. It might depend on their course. So there will be, for example, medical students, for example, there might be some adjustments that we can't make for medical students that we can make for students on other courses. And it also very much depends on the support that's available at the university. So there will be some differences across institutions in terms of the types of support that students have access to. So that might be because the university has different inclusive practice available, and it might be because there are some differences as well in terms of what a university disability service can put in place in terms of individual reasonable adjustments. But that's what we're thinking about as well with the student. We're thinking about inclusive learning, what's available, let's talk about that. So that might be things like, well, you will have access to lecture recordings for most of your lectures, or the university, the departments provide PowerPoint slides in advance of the teaching session. So there's some examples of inclusive learning that we ask all departments at the university to adhere to, but then there will be individual reasonable adjustments that we can put in place for the student as well. But not all higher education institutions have the same types of support. So it's really important that a potential applicant does their research, particularly if it's important to them that a certain type of support is available. So some of this support will come from the institution through inclusive practice. Some will come through the disability service in terms of individual support and adjustments, and some will come through DSA. So to be able to have access to all of the support that's available, that's why we encourage applicants and students to apply for support both through the University Disability Service and through disabled student allowances. So depending on individual needs in terms of what the support might include, we've got some examples on the next slide. So I've said about there being kind of the two main routes of support in terms of what the disability service can do and what a student might access through their own individual disabled student allowances through DSA. This is a bit of a kind of mishmash of both of those. But in terms of what we are doing as a disability service, so we would speak with the student about the exam situation, and we would identify exam adjustments. So that might be things like extra time. It might be access to rest periods. It might be ensuring that a student can take in snacks with them. It might be access to a PC. And some universities, so for example, Hallam University, in terms of their inclusive practice around exam adjustments, some of that, for example, extra time, that is made available for all students. Whereas at Sheffield Uni, if a student needs to access extra time, then that would be recommended to the exams office as an individual reasonable adjustment. Learning support plans, learning contracts, so it will be called something different depending on the university, but there will be an information sharing process from the University Disability Service to the academic department, the academic school. So at Sheffield Uni, we use a learning support plan process, and in that document, we can explain the reason why a student is accessing support. So we can confirm their diagnosis, and we can talk about the potential impact of that at university, think about what the barriers might be. And then within that, we can then make recommendations to the academic department in terms of the support that we would recommend that they put in place for a student. So again, it depends on the individual student, but it might be things like maybe if a student needs a little bit more contact than the regular contact that an academic department provides. So a little bit more input in terms of kind of reviewing their progress, checking on how they're doing. It might be that if a student needs to request extensions for assignment deadlines, then the learning support plan might provide a bit more context as to why that might be, as to why we might ask the department to take into consideration a student's disability when deciding whether to give that extension. Some universities might be able to recommend blanket extensions on all assignment deadlines, for example. So it's the way that we communicate with academic departments. Face-to-face support to help with managing studies or to work on study skills. So that might come through a student's disabled student allowances, DSA. So that would be things like specialist mentoring for students with a specific learning difference. It might be specialist study skills to support students with a specific learning difference. So that's obviously about ensuring that a student is really confident about their study skills for HE level. It might be supporting them to develop new strategies around their studies. It might be looking at how they plan their time, organisation strategies. It might be exam technique, revision technique. So anything that a student needs to do in terms of developing their study skills, that might be provided through DSA. And that's, so for example, that might be for a student with a specific learning difference, or it might be for a student with ADHD, for example. In terms of help around managing studies, again, that might come through a student's DSA in the form of specialist mentoring. So, for example, for a student who has a mental health condition, a student who's autistic, or who has ADHD, they might be able to access mentoring support through DSA. And that's really practical focus support where a student can meet with their specialist mentor, usually for an hour a week, to focus on things like time management, organisation, prioritisation, task planning, a bit of a check-in in terms of how the student's doing that week, if they've got anything coming up that might be making them feel a bit worried, a bit anxious, if you want help to kind of navigate, keeping in touch with other students who are in their groups for group work assessments, things like that. Some universities can have some systems in place or processes in place for diagnostic assessments. So again, this very much depends on the university. Some universities can refer students for a diagnostic assessment for a specific learning difficulty, learning difference. If the university does that, they might have that referral process in place. They might also be able to provide some funding, but that very much depends upon the university. The reason why some universities do that is because to apply for disabled student allowances, a student with a specific learning difficulty does need to have a full diagnostic assessment to confirm their diagnosis. But because some universities can put in place support for students without that same high level of evidence, it might be that a student can access a lot of support within the university without that diagnostic assessment. Again, if it's important to a student to be able to access that, then it's, obviously the students should do their research and find out what's available, because it might be that if they need that diagnostic assessment and there isn't a process in place at the university, it might be that they need to do that before they start university if they want to apply for DSA. In terms of what the DSA specific support might look like, so Sarah's going to tell us a bit more about the process of DSA in terms of what it looks like and how to apply. But some of the things it might provide an allowance for might be support to travel to and from the university in terms of a taxi allowance. It might include specialist equipment, so that might be things like a printer for a student to have in their own study room. There's a lot of assistive technology that can support students at university with things like note-taking, planning their ideas for assignments, supporting them with proofreading, for example, and things like ergonomic study equipment as well. So a student can potentially be considered for specialist equipment through their DSA. And then the specialist study skills tutor, the specialist mentor, and also if a student needs a sign language interpreter, then that would be funded through DSA up to a certain amount of funding would be available. So hopefully that just gives a bit of an indicator as well in terms of, you know, the kind of the type of support that's available, and also, you know, that there is potentially quite a lot of support available through the University Disability Service and through DSA. So with regards to how to set up support through the University's Disability Service, so like Jackie said, it's really, really useful and important that an applicant shares that information on their UCAS form. There will be a disability, there is a disability section on the UCAS form, and if an applicant ticks the kind of the disability box that they identify with, then the only thing that does is enable the University Disability Service to be able to have contact with that applicant. So it's about us being able to share information about our service with an applicant with a view to starting to set up their support. So if an applicant doesn't do that, then that information sharing process from us doesn't happen. The applicant, the student, would need to contact us directly. As we've said, there will be some differences in terms of what the University's Disability Service requires in terms of evidence. So for DSA, it's really straightforward in terms of what Student Finance England require. But for the University Disability Service, there might be some differences. So have that contact with the service to find out what evidence they may need, because it might not be a full diagnostic assessment. There might be some, it might be, for example, evidence of exam arrangements in previous education. That might be enough to access some support. And then have contact with the Disability Service to discuss potential support, so that the service can make referrals for support and put that support in place. And like Jackie said, we don't request information from schools. We do rely on applicants being in contact with us to set up their support.
So it's now over to me. My name's Sarah Lamb. I'm a disability advisor at Sheffield Hallam University. So just to talk you through a little bit more about what Disabled Students Allowance is and who can apply for it. So it's a government funded allowance and it covers, like Alison said, specialist support. So that's really support that has a cost related to it, and a high cost usually. Some support is provided by the university, but a lot comes through Disabled Students Allowance. If you think of it a bit of a triangle really, and at the bottom of the triangle you've got inclusive practice of how universities work, and then you've got the support that the university can put in place through like learning contracts and reasonable adjustments, and then the top bit of the triangle is the very specialist support that would come through Disabled Students Allowance. And like Alison said, that could be equipment, software, money, funding for photocopying or printing, and a taxi allowance. Not all disabilities will be eligible for all these things. It's based on need. So the best thing to do is to access the University Disability Services and Disabled Students Allowance to get the maximum amount of support. Who's eligible? Most UK students, most home students who have home fees, who have evidence. It's the evidence that is key. Unfortunately, the teams in the Student Finance England office who process the disability evidence aren't specialists, so they have very strict guidelines about what needs to be included in the medical evidence, and there's more information about this on the .gov website about how to apply, and they've also got a form on there that GPs can complete to provide evidence. The key bit to remember is that students might not know which university they're going to. But your DSA goes with the student to any university, so you can apply like Jackie said, in March time, I always think Easter. That's what I've always had in my head. Easter's when you can apply, and they apply through the SFE portal. And then if they end up not going to their first choice, or they change, or they apply through clearing, or change courses, or do better or worse than they thought, then that needs assessment could be just amended. So it's still worth putting it in place, even if you don't know which institution you're going to or which course you're doing. Disabled Students Allowance is not a loan. It doesn't need repaying, and it's not means tested, but it's also not a pot of money. Students will have a needs assessment to work out what support they need, and DSA won't affect any family benefits. What courses are eligible? Higher education at level 4 and higher, so up to postgraduate courses as well. Access courses aren't eligible, and apprenticeship courses, even if they're on the degree, aren't eligible, but there is separate funding for degree apprenticeships. It's not as extensive, but there is still support available. Next slide, please. So, like I said, you apply to for Disabled Students Allowance. Students apply online. They apply once they've done the finance and for their tuition fees and their maintenance loan. There's an option to say, do you want to apply for Disabled Students Allowance? You can do that at the same time as applying for your tuition fees and your student loan, but also if you discover that you have a disability as the course goes on, or you decide to disclose it at a later date, you can go back into your application and change that. You then need to submit evidence. Currently, they are still accepting a working or probable diagnosis of autism or ADHD. So if students are on that really long waiting list to have a full assessment, their GP can confirm in writing, and there's a form on the Gov website explaining how that they're on that waiting list, and SFE will take that as evidence. And again, if students can't use their PIP application, students with autism can use their EHCP. And for mental health, it could be a letter from their GP or one of the forms that they can fill in. So once that information has been processed by Student Finance England, or Student Finance Wales or Scotland, depending on where you're a student, you can then attend a study needs assessment. Now, this is one-to-one, and it's not determining whether or not you have a disability. It's looking at the type of support that you might need through Disabled Students Allowance, and it's looking at that through the student's experience and also through the course and also through the disability as well. And it can be really useful for students to have a think about what they might have found useful before. The needs assessor should be really experienced and should be able to chat through to them about what other students have had, and what they might find useful. There's a link at the bottom of here, and there's some really useful information on the UCAS web pages about the different aspects of Disabled Students Allowance, and different videos to have a look at. In terms of accessing support, a letter's sent once SFE have received the report from the needs assessor. The letters aren't clear. Now, most disability advisors accept that this is the case. So if the student is struggling toward their equipment or set up the support, get in touch with their disability advisor. At any point during the DSA process, whether they're already a student or they're in the application process, get in touch, because we'll help you. We want that support in place by the time you start your course, ideally. And this is why we want you to apply early. The DSA application process can take at least 3 months to complete. So start, like Jackie said, in March, Easter time, start that process. Even if you don't know at that point which university you're going to, it makes a big difference, particularly for students who have complex and high dependency needs. Getting the support thought through and organised early will make a big difference. And like I say, the UCAS videos are really helpful on there. Next slide, please. So a bit of a checklist, and we really, I suppose, can't instill this as kind of reiterate this enough, really, but encourage students to disclose on their UCAS form. That information about their disability doesn't go to the tutors who are considering their application. We had a question earlier about whether or not to disclose within the personal statement. If you think that it is of benefit, there are lots of benefits from having a disability, from in terms of the way you think, to challenges that you've overcome. So it can be really helpful to disclose that, and particularly if it relates to your course. A lot of the courses that I support are health and wellbeing courses. So we have students who study occupational therapy because they've had that experience themselves as a user. So it can be really helpful to demonstrate an insight into what you're going on to study, or an ability to cope with difficulties. Get hold of the required disability evidence. Like Alison said earlier, some universities will provide funding for a diagnostic assessment for dyslexia. It tends to be that full educational psychologist reports aren't done in schools and colleges, usually because of the availability, but also because of the cost. But that is needed if they want to apply for disabled students allowance. A lot of institutions offer really relevant transition events that can give really bespoke information about where you are at the process. And by that stage, you're probably further on in the application process, so you have a better idea of where you're going. And then the information could be very much about you and the institution and course you're going to. Some students will need adjustments to their accommodation. So again, apply early, get that information through. And there's a lot around for all students, I think, not just students who have a disability, but preparing for that independent living and self-advocacy. Because once students come to university, they are considered adults. It's not possible for parents to ring and just say, oh, can you check in on my daughter or my son? So it's worth having those discussions with your child about how you'll communicate, and whether or not there needs to be a consent to share agreement in place. Some universities will do that, but we can also offer general advice about the different stages of the processes. So if your application is completed through clearing, it can all feel a bit like a mad dash. So definitely encourage a student to contact the disability service of where they're ending up. But hopefully they will have known that they were going to university and will have applied for disabled students allowance. But yeah, like we say, you can't reiterate enough. Apply early, it will make all the difference. So yeah, students contact us at different stages of their studies. And like I mentioned earlier, students might have started university and not realised how much support they've had from parents or carers, and then they might start to struggle. So it might be more clear then that there's difficulties, perhaps particularly for students with ADHD, that becomes more transparent when they're living independently. So they may not have gone through the process. They might have had support, informal support at school, but not gone through the process. Now, so I'm going to pass over to Alex now, who's a recent graduate of the University of Sheffield.
Hello, I hope you can hear me all okay. I was just gonna talk about some tips and stuff about how, well, yeah, just tips and stuff about how I ended up applying for university and how I put in my, basically, sorry, I'm really rambling now. Long story short, so I'm autistic and I've just graduated from the University of Sheffield and I did philosophy, and I just wanted to talk to you about how I went about disclosing my autism and the transition I made from secondary school to sixth form. So as soon as I was applying on UCAS, I made sure to disclose my autism. And this is just so super important to disclose it as soon as you can, just to get just so that, support can be put in place as quickly as possible. And by you disclosing it on your UCAS, the University Disability or Inclusion team from the university that you apply for will email you asking for details such as the diagnostic report or a doctor letter. You should apply for DSA as soon as you have submitted your UCAS application. You do not need to wait for your offers. You can apply for student finance, and DSA can pay for things like specialist autism mentoring, study skills support, software, equipment, or travel. So it was really important that I got my DSA put in place, so that it meant that when I came to university, I was able to receive specialist autism mentoring, I got study skills, and I got certain software equipment. So for example, I got some, through DSA, I got some soundproof headphones so that when I was studying in the library and stuff, I could still concentrate. So when I applied for university, I disclosed my autism on my UCAS application form. This then alerted Sheffield University that I had autism. So prior to me coming to university, the university, the disability team, so Alison's team, got in contact with me, and then through that, I was able to create a learning support plan. And I was able to arrange a meeting with Alison, with the disability team, before I started at the university to plan my transition support. And the disability team, I'm just talking on Sheffield, so it's different for each university, but then they were able to offer me an autism-friendly induction, which was super beneficial. So this was almost like a welcome open day thing that was just for autistic applicants. So that was great. So then when you actually come to university, when you decide on your university, you will meet with your disability team at your chosen university, and often you will put in place a learning support plan. So a learning support plan basically just outlines the adjustments that your lecturers and tutors must follow. So for example, in my learning support plan, it told my tutors that I ask a lot of questions. So when I have my one-to-one meetings with my tutors, I need them to be explicit, I need them to be clear. In my learning support plan, I also got things to make sure my lecture slides were in advance so I could read through them ahead of my lectures. It also meant that I could have extended deadlines or extra time in exams. So for example, if one week I'm having a really stressful week or I had a medical issue that week, they could be more lenient with extending my deadlines. So basically, what I want to say is that the support at university is so much better than school. They were so much more accommodating and supportive, but it's just important that the student advocates for themselves, and that is just by disclosing and just making sure you ask for help, because there's so much help out there, but it's just making sure that you sort of, even if you don't know what support you need, it's just making sure that you contact the disability team and contact the university and tell them what you think might help you, or tell them what you are struggling with, and they can try and help come up with a solution to try and help you.
What you've told everybody there is exactly what that they want to hear, is that it's coming from you rather than from us, as you're someone that's actually been through it, so it's really key for your messages, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you're sharing your experience is always brilliant. So we will go on now, because we are obviously coming near to the end of the session, but just wanted to talk to you a bit about our HEP Hub. So our HEP Hub is under refurb, if you like, but we have got lots of information on there that is still valid and still able to download. Now, this resource here for you is a guide for students with health condition, mental health condition, disability, or specific learning difficulty who are considering higher education. So please do download that. It also helps with within there to the questions you might want to ask if they are going to an open day, for instance. And I would recommend that students that are thinking of going do go to an open day, because you will be able to talk to the disability service within those institutions to find out a bit more about what support there is on offer at those institutions. We do have a lot of other resources. So for instance, this presentation and this recording will also go on there as well, so you can, for anybody can access those documents. So please do send them out to people to access, because the more that see this information, the better for all of these students, so that we can help as many students as possible go into higher education if that's what they want to do. As I said, it's a signpost as well. There's lots of other things on there for our partner institutions, so the University of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam as well. So that's our HEP hub, and the website is on that page as well. So we are now at the end of the session. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, well, this tea time.